Welcome Internet. Today we're going to be talking about mental health professionals and their complicated and difficult relationship with people with intellectual disability. So I want to preface this by saying that I myself work with people with intellectual disability. What I mean by intellectual disability is a limitation on cognitive ability to be able to read and write, perform, problem solve as, let's say, most people would. Technically speaking, the people with intellectual disability are about 2% of the global population, and they vary on the spectrum. Some people can't live by themselves, some people can be independent with some help. It's a very wide, spectrum of people and of behaviors, and so on and so forth. The reason why I want to talk about the complicated relationship with mental health professionals is that, unfortunately, there are many issues that I have seen repeatedly come up in the treatment of people with intellectual disabilities. And here I'm not talking about the outside environment. I'm really talking about people who have trained as psychologists, psychiatrists, psychotherapists, and what their, reactions have been towards people with intellectual disabilities. I also think that it's important to talk about it, as what happens in the mental health community also shows a more global perspective. So I want to talk about it through three lenses. The first lens that I'm going to talk about is how mental health professionals often feel unarmed to deal with people with intellectual disabilities. They might feel that they are not capable of reaching out to the person, that the person needs are too massive or too complicated, or perhaps that therapy is not even beneficial because they're not cognitively capable of understanding what's happening. So this is, I think, somewhat of a cop-out. What I mean by that is that these people often stop at the idea of intellectual disability and just push the patient away from because of that. They start to lose interest. Because often, and what people don't always talk about, is that mental health professionals do this work, do these jobs, because they want to have an intellectual input. They want patients that can associate, that can say something interesting, that can, in a way, entertain the therapist. Not always, and not all the time, but there is that element of it should be interesting. And the problem arises when people with intellectual disabilities cannot entertain that. Their issues can be as deep and as profound as everyone else, but they won't necessarily be able to formulate it in the same way. They might need the therapist to really work with them, to really put a discussion. It's not about the person just talking by themselves. It's really like, what did you feel? What did it mean for you? And sometimes you have to yourself offer propositions like, were you happy? Were you sad? Were you tired? And you really have to put in yourself as a therapist into the relationship with someone who has intellectual disability. Like, if you stay remote, if you stay a bit outside, as, let's say, classical psychotherapy asks of you, well, then the person is going to stay outside as well. You have to invest yourself for the intellectually disabled individual to invest themselves. So first and foremost, that demands and requires an effort on the part of the therapist, an effort that not everyone wants to do. Also, there is the level of which you reach the patient. For example, if someone has issues articulating, you might want them to draw, you might have to adapt the setting in order for them to get the best out of the session possible. Again, the adaptation is something that not every therapist wants to do or cares about, as a lot of therapists still work on this assumption that it's the patient that must adapt themselves to you, not the inverse, which, when it comes to intellectual disabilities, is the wrong approach, as these people are always people with intellectual disabilities are always trying to adapt to the outside world, but always fall short because of the cognitive limitations. And it's reproducing the same type of violence if you're not prepared to meet them halfway, or to try and facilitate by having pencils on the desk, or by having drawings, or by letting them show you on their phones what they're talking about. So there's a lot of creativity to be had, but not every therapist is interested in that. Also, the content of what they're saying is often not deep childhood traumas, at least not on the outset. You really have to work your way through this for them to feel that they can talk about it to you. And often there is a lot of, when you speak with mental health professionals about people with intellectual disability, there's often two types of reactions. For example, when I talk about it with colleagues, two types. There's the type of complete disinterest, like they let you finish a sentence and they jump on something else. And it's evident that they don't care. Like you'd be talking about, I don't know, let's say borderline, they'd be passionate about it, you'd have a long 4-hour talk about it. But when it touches on intellectual disabilities, like, okay, and then moving on. So it's quite subtle in these forms. And I'm not saying that you always have to have a 4-hour discussion, but it becomes very apparent that any other topic is better than intellectual disability. And there is the second topic, which is unfortunate, I have seen it, dehumanization. Like when you start talking about them, people are gonna, other therapists might just say, oh, well, I mean, what's so interesting with them? So that's the mild perspective, and there's a much more sinister perspective that is rare, and I'm going to say that it's rare, but I have seen it, of some people saying, well, it's just like dealing with animals. And you can see here that there's a true, real violence in that, and it's a violence that I think permeates our whole domain. As, let's not kid ourselves, psychotherapy was built by people who were seeking the depths of the human mind, were seeking something of an intelligence in mankind, an unconscious intelligence. And when they feel that the patient is devoid of intelligence, there is a rejection, a deep, profound rejection of the individual they have in front of them. And there is this complete and utter rejection, even things like diagnoses, which I am not a big fan of. Even then, they get rejected because it's still like, oh no, but they're not smart enough to have a oh yeah, borderline or narcissist. No, that doesn't count. They just don't understand anything. And you can see here that, in a way, the therapists and the psychotherapeutic world, at least those individuals, are reproducing the same type of violence that society always pushes towards people with intellectual disabilities, that they can't understand, that they, oh well, there's no point in helping them because they'll always stay at the same limits. And all of that is wrong. And I want to say this very straight, like, people with intellectual disabilities suffer. They suffer from the same types of problems as everyone else. And the fact that there is this stupid belief that because they hide their pain throughout a smile, because they, how can I say, have cognitive limits, that they're fine with their suffering, is in of itself one of the most ridiculous assumptions that there is. They often hide their sadness because they understand that the environment isn't gonna be there for them. Not on that their only chance of survival, quote unquote, is to act as if everything was fine, everything was happy, everything was good. But under all of that, a lot of sadness, a lot of despair is there. Despair because what you have to realize is the person with intellectual disability is someone who often has parents that they consciously or unconsciously, feel that they're disappointed because they were never able to even entertain the idea that they would, I don't know, become a medical doctor or a lawyer or an engineer. And I mean, very few people become any of these things, right? But for the person with intellectual disability, there was no contest even. It was never going to happen, period. Like normal individual, let's say, well, the person without disabilities can at least give the illusion of that. The person with intellectual disability is a narcissistic blow to the parents. The parents have created a child that they can't dream about. It becomes like, what's going to be the future of the child? The child is going to have to be institutionalized. They're going to have to rely on their brothers and sisters, and so on and so forth. But there is no brilliance, which is a component that's normally there from the get-go with children who are quote-unquote normal. Or at least non-disabled, or not visibly disabled, should I say. But it's not there for those children. So the only way of keeping a good relationship is at least to be happy, or to pretend to be happy, in order for at least to get some form of affection. And often that depth, that complexity is completely missed on the face of it. I also think that fundamentally this dehumanization is a more global trend in our society of dehumanizing people with intellectual disabilities. Because often what men in general, humans, define themselves first and foremost is by being intelligent. Our intelligence becomes the marker of our humanity. And in that, there is an unconscious assumption I think we all experience, that as long as we are smart, then everything is worthwhile. If we're not smart, then it isn't worthwhile. And are we even part of humanity if we're not smart? And I think that that's an unconscious assumption that permeates everyone. And I think that often therapists do not analyze that part of themselves, of like, why do I believe that there is nothing interesting? Why do I even go for the belief that there might be nothing there? Because often there are a myriad of internal processes in the person with intellectual disabilities, as anyone. And when you really listen to them, it becomes very clear that they are undergoing and experiencing and living the same mental processes, that they're not different. Not so different. They're not unhuman. They're very human. And I would even say sometimes they're even more human than the others, because they never lose touch with their core sense of feeling. They feel things. They feel happy in the relationship, sad in the relationship, angry, and that all of those emotions are very much there, and often they're very open about their affects. And I would even say that sometimes some of them even have a certain gift of positive projective identification, i.e. they know that the first reaction will be rejection, so they tend to ease the person into the relationship, trying to get interested. Some of them will even ask you, oh, what's your favorite book, or what's your film, or what, and that they try really hard to put people into a good headspace for the relationship. And they're very accommodating, much more than most people. And I think that that's something that they have learned, because they know that without that they would be rejected. In the case of mental health professionals, that rejection is really, really strong. And it's something that I don't know if you can fight against it, because it would need a societal change of perspective. But often what I've found is that this dehumanization needs to be called out, because it is really, how can I say, because in those moments, without them realizing what they're saying, because I really do think that a therapist that realizes how bad it is would not even utter it. And I think that it's an unconscious form of violence that they have just completely associated, that they believe that humanity is defined solely by its intelligence, when in truth it's defined by our emotions, our state of mind, and so many other sins. And one of the sins that I have found is that often these therapists just, in a way, are taken by an epistemological, i.e. they want to know, they're interested because the subject is interesting. But if the subject is quote unquote not interesting, then they don't give an effort. In a way, they want to be excited by the work. And instead of trying to find the exciting parts of a human, they reject them outright when on their a priori that nothing is there, not even the capacity for a diagnosis. And I think that form of rejection is very deep and it's widespread among the community of people with mental health. And I've seen it, I myself, many, many times when I talk about these people, that there is a deep sense of what's the point? What is even the point of listening to them? And that's why I wanted to talk about it, because there is a point, and they're very interesting people, and frankly, I'm fed up of this laziness of thought that because they're different, then it's worthless. I'm really against it. And I do think, and I'm going to say this again, because I've already said it in other videos, that they do fundamentally benefit from psychotherapy. Because they can express their sadness more easily, because they can connect to others, because they adapt a lot. It takes a toll on their psyche. Therefore, a bit less adaptation might be able to give them more spontaneousness, more joy in life. And all of these elements are what I think necessary. And I think it's necessary also to talk about them, because they themselves can't advocate for themselves. So often they rely on family, friends, to be able to talk about this. And I think that because psychotherapy is often an outside, it's two people working with each other without the environment, I think that now it's important to have people advocate for them, and that's what I'm doing now. And by no means I'm saying that I'm the only one. We have in France the chance of having a very good psychoanalyst called Simone Sauce that also advocates for them. And a lot of other people like Caroline Demul also do advocate. So it's not that I'm alone, but I wanted to advocate here and now with you as your more international audience, and I do hope that in your country it's not as present, but at least here in France it's an uphill battle, but a battle that's well worth the fight. And that's what I think. So I'm sorry it might have been a more rambly video, but I really felt that it was important to get the message out there. And I hope you found this interesting. If you have any questions, please feel free to do so, to ask them in the comments. I'll see you in the next one.